All right. Good day to everybody. Welcome to another our monthly episode of Calmly Considered. I am Alan Bevere. I am the self-appointed Anselm of Canterbury Chair of Theology, of Podcast Theology and Culture at Faith Seeking Understanding University, where all seekers are welcome to ponder profound things free of charge. And my conversation partner, as always, every month is the incomparable Michael Cruz, who is the Grand Poobah Chair of Economics and Public Theology at FSUU. How do you like that? FSUU, Faith Seeking Understanding University. I was expecting you to have your hat on, Michael.
Well, I do have my Chiefs cap. I think I left it downstairs.
That's
I've been wearing it all around.
Well, let's talk football for a minute before we get into the subject at hand.
Yeah.
Your Chiefs seem to have figured out the problem, it seems.
Something happened.
Where my Browns, not even sure what the problem is at this point.
Yeah, what was the deal with your Browns? I didn't get to actually watch any of the game. What was the deal?
Well, I think our defense was just horrible. Now look, you got to give Bill Belichick credit. He's just, he's just a great coach, right? And
Right.
So you just have to do that. But I don't know, our defense, it looked like we beat the Bengals the week before and decided to take 2 weeks off. And our offense, Baker Mayfield did not have a good first half, but at the same time, on the first drive, Dearness Johnson, our backup running back, ran for 58 yards and they got a touchdown. And then like the next series, it's like they gave up on the running game. So I have no idea.
Yeah.
I don't know what's
Weird.
going on.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well,
it's the hazards of being a sports fan, right?
Exactly. You never know. Yeah, Kansas City,
So,
I think the defense played much better this game. That's about as good as they played. And then on offense, people have been yelling for weeks now to stop trying to do all the long passes, the deep routes, that kind of thing, because everybody's doing this double safety thing. Just take some run game, some short passes, quick short passes. And that's what they did this time. And that really opened up the long pass because they had to come in to defend against that. So it just made the game more complicated for the Raiders. This, I think, is the first game that they beat a really good team this year. It feels like they've got Dallas next week. That will be a big test. And through the rest of their season, their last 7 remaining opponents, none of them have losing records. So they've got to play some good football.
Yeah, they do. Well, we play the Lions next week, so if we can't win, we need to give it up and go home. But hey, the good news, Michael, is in 3 months, pitchers and catchers report, man.
You bet. We're less than 100 days away. It's coming.
Oh, anyway. All right. So let's move on to the topic at hand. Immigration, we're going to talk about today. What does the biblical witness say, and how do we deal with the contemporary challenge of immigration? So let's talk scripture for a minute. Boy, the Bible has a lot to say about the alien, the immigrant, the person seeking asylum. And by the way, before we get into this discussion, let me put to bed one thing. And that is, I get people, and when I get into this conversation with folks, they will say, well, the Bible's talking about legal immigration.
Yeah.
There's no such category in the ancient world, right? There are no secured borders. There are no green cards or visas. There's nothing like that. And so it's just not, you're reading back into the text, right? This is about people who, for whatever reason, are not in their homeland.
Right.
Okay. So we need to get that straight. All right. So the Bible has a lot to say about the foreigner, doesn't it?
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, and things, by the way, that, if you read them, like I called up on my phone some verses here. So here's Deuteronomy 27:19. Cursed is anyone who withholds justice from the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow. Here's one. I love to quote these verses in particular. Exodus 12:49. The same law applies to both the native born and the foreigner residing among you. And so in other words, basically, and we get this about, I think, 3 or 4 times in the Old Testament, where basically the people of God are told, you shall not have a separate law for the foreigner and for the citizen, the resident. It's the same law, right?
Yeah.
So when we get into this discussion about constitutional rights, should that apply to the foreigner or not? And again, we want to be careful, because we're not going to apply biblical affirmations in a straight line to modern law. But the reality is, the Bible is very clear. You're not going to have a different set of rules for the foreigner that you're going to have for the people of God.
Right. Well, and it seems to me that the biblical narrative, as it begins through the early stages of Genesis and then continuing on into the New Testament, is a continual unfolding that Jesus is Lord of all, that Jesus is Lord of all humanity. And so the various human distinctions that we want to create in terms of nationalities, of race, of all these various things, those are all subordinate to the understanding that all human beings are created in the image of God, that all human beings have worth and value and are to be treated as such. And that's not always necessarily clear, particularly in the Old Testament. In certain passages, there does seem to be multiple tiers as to how certain people are treated. I think about the Jubilee only applied to the people that were Israelites. You had slavery issues. You couldn't enslave an Israelite, but you could enslave others, although there were considerable restrictions placed on how you were to treat slaves and that type of thing. So it seems to me that there is an unfolding that's the trajectory that I see in Scripture anyway.
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me is the reminder that God gives to the people that Abraham was a wanderer and he was, in a sense, an immigrant, and you were slaves in Egypt. Do not oppress the foreigner, do not oppress the alien, because you at one time were foreigners, you at one time were aliens. So for what's powerful for that, for me, by the way, I don't know what your ancestry is and your history is, but my great grandparents came over after the turn of the century, the 20th century. They came over from Italy and Sicily. And so why that's important, at least for me personally, and I still remember my great grandfather, this would have been my mother's grandfather. He lived to be almost 101. And I can remember, I'll still never forget the day I and one of my brothers and my grandfather and he sat around at their kitchen table, and he was telling us stories of when he was a young man here and trying to make his way as an immigrant. And not only telling us some funny stories about different things, but telling us about some of the stuff he experienced. Not everybody was happy he was there.
Right, exactly.
And I think to myself, as a descendant of Italian and Sicilian immigrants, I need to remember their life and getting established here, and I need to make sure that I don't in turn become those people who treated them poorly, right? I mean, if I'm gonna, and so there's this. By the way, let me also say that there's these cover stories again that we make, all of us. Is that this idea that, at the turn of the 20th century, all the immigrants, Italian, Irish, whatever they were, came to work hard and establish themselves, unlike these immigrants today who just want to be lazy and live off of everybody. But when you read the material of the time, those same accusations were leveled against Italian immigrants and Irish immigrants. There was a case in, I want to say it's Boston, where there was an Italian immigrant who murdered somebody, and this was used as a way to caricature all Italian immigrants. And they're just here to rob us, and all this, that, take our jobs and everything else. And we tend to forget that. We tend to pass over that the same criticisms we hear today, where people were hearing them 100 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, just briefly, from personal story time, my immigrants, I have a rather complex mix of people in my family history, but my great grandmother Cruz, her last name was Holmes, and her family goes back in Massachusetts to Plymouth. I mean, they came from Plymouth to Missouri. So that whole line of the ancestry is very, very white, very English, very sort of the Boston upper crust. Yeah. And she had a brother named Sidney. And Sidney was very involved in the Republican Party in Boston at that time. He was what they call messenger for the State House. He's the one who took the bills back and forth between the Senate and the House at the State House about 100 years ago. So very much ensconced in this very white America. My great-grandfather came in about 1880s and ended up getting married to my great-grandmother. He was from Denmark, and that's about as close to, we're talking about Northern European and all that, the looks and everything are right, but obviously he is a foreigner. And I have a letter that you got lots of letters from those times. And apparently my grandparents were having some struggles. And so the letter had gone to Uncle Sidney asking for some help, for some financial help. And Uncle Sidney was willing to help my grandfather as long as none of that money went to that immigrant, his father.
Yeah.
I mean, and so because these were, people that were not trustworthy, we're talking about somebody Danish, who's today and I think the other thing that you're pointing out, and this I think is the other thing that tends to happen, is that unfortunately part of what assimilation comes to mean for too many of us is when you are assimilated, when you take on the views and the attitudes of the white majority in the United States. And so then, even though you came from a group that was oppressed or discriminated against and so on, the way that you now get your bona fides is to be against the same thing that the white folks are against,
right.
To share their same prejudice and attitudes. That's the dark side of assimilation. Yeah. And you see this now with, I think there's a number of Hispanic, Latina folks that their parents or grandparents immigrated a few generations ago. They have now made it. They're in the middle class, and now they will look back at people that are struggling south of the border, who are trying to make a better lives for themselves, and treat them with the same sort of disdain that has too often been typical of other Americans. So it's a cycle that you see repeated all throughout American history. This is
it's there. You cannot deny that this is something we've been dealing with for a long time. It's not brand new. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I will say this as a pastor, I have been in ministry to immigrants. And I can remember in one church I served years ago, there was an apartment building nearby in which there were Mexican immigrants, and we started a ministry to them. Now, I didn't know who was here legally, who was not. I had a person in my church ask me if I found out someone was here illegally, would I report them? The answer was no, that's not my job. That doesn't mean I support illegal immigration. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I didn't see that as my job. I saw that as a pastor, is to minister to these folks. Every single one of those persons who were here to better the lives of their families.
Right.
No one was being lazy. I love all this when you say about the immigrants, the illegals that collecting welfare. That doesn't happen, folks. You're not eligible for welfare. Yeah. I mean, how many times do we got to spread this stuff? That's just not true.
Well, right? And they simultaneously are taking all of our welfare while they're also simultaneously taking all of our jobs.
Yeah, right. That's another thing. I mean, seriously, come on, folks. So anyway, but the point is that every one of them was hardworking. They worked at a local factory, and I'm not going to say too much about it because I don't want to out anybody. But they were working at a local factory, and the factory owner told me, he said, I can't get anybody else to do these jobs.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
And they're the only ones who will do the jobs. And I've heard that from people out in California and out west who own, various agricultural, farms. Right. And they said the only people I can get to do these jobs are because they're not, they're dirty jobs.
Right.
And so it's not that they're taking the jobs, it's that they're getting the jobs no one else wants.
Right.
That no one else will take. Now, having said that, I am not in favor of employers ignoring immigration law.
Right.
But I'm going to say this, and I'll let you respond to this. I think the government has given employers good reason to ignore it.
Oh yeah, sure they have. Yeah. You're talking about like the agricultural workers. There's a great story. I think it's 1965. Back up 20 years before that, during World War II, because all the war and all the men had gone off to war, and you had so few people at home, they needed more agricultural workers, and so we made a arrangement with Mexico to really relax border enforcement in order for agricultural workers to come to Mexico to work, and that went on for about 20 years. And in the mid 60s, they decided to sort of close that program down. It had been going on for about 20 years. And so 1965, they had this big program where they were going to recruit all of these healthy young teenagers, young adult men that were athletic build and that type of thing. They were going to come out and work the fields and pay. It was a disaster. I mean, these guys couldn't handle it. The brutal sun, the stooped over work and so on. It was just more than they could handle. There's been multiple stories since about various attempts, experiments at trying to recruit people, Americans, native people that are native to the United States, to get them to come work those fields. And it never works. It's a seasonal thing, and it's extremely hard work, and it's not very high pay. And if you try to increase the wages too much, then the people that are producing the crops simply just won't harvest them. It becomes more expensive to harvest them with higher wages than it does to just let the crops die. There's been situations. It's a tough, difficult situation to figure out how do you do that justly, and without going too far down the road towards solutions. I think the idea of trying to keep out people who want to work in the United States on a seasonal basis, that the providing worker visas for people to come in and be able to work would benefit both those people that are wanting to work and our American economy, because those people are not taking jobs from Americans. And in fact, by being here, the pay that they are getting while they're here, they are actually creating more jobs because the money they spend to buy food, to buy clothes, to pay for shelter, to do the other things that they do while they're here. So, yeah.
Then that brings us then to an interesting question. I'm a big fan of generous immigration law. I believe we need to be generous in who we let into this country, because I think it makes our culture, our society, our economy vital. And by the way, that is not necessarily a progressive view. I can point to George Will. I can point to Bill Kristol. I can point to other conservatives who have made that argument, who have said we have a stake in generous and in having, I don't know what word you want, larger quotas for immigration, because it makes us better. And you bring in freshness. And by the way, it's not just an issue of people to harvest our fields.
Right.
We bring in people who, high skilled people who contribute to medicine, who contribute to engineering. I mean, you can really make a conservative case that generous immigration is a good thing. What do you think about that?
Definitely. If you look at where the needs are in the American workforce, where we typically have the highest demand but not enough supply, is at the very top of the employment pyramid. The people that are chemists and engineers and nuclear scientists, that type of thing. You need more of those people, and we can't turn them out quick enough. And at the bottom of the pyramid is also where we tend to have a lack of workers. We don't have the people that can do the agriculture, certain types of labor, certain types of domestic work, that kind of thing, or other seasonal jobs. And somebody likened it, said that if you look at one way to think about it is if you look at the American employment structure, it's a shape of a diamond. It's narrow at the top and narrow at the bottom. Whereas the shape of the immigrants that come tends to be the shape of an hourglass. It's heavy at the top, heavy at the bottom, and narrow in the middle. And so it's a perfect fit for how the two things could fit together. Yeah. So I think America benefits by having the ability for people to work here. Again, we get into all these details of what's immigration and what that doesn't necessarily mean people coming here to become citizens and living here permanently,
Right.
but creating ways for people to come here and work. And particularly for those that are the poorest, and we're talking about Mexico or Central America, places like that, more money goes to those countries through people coming to work in the United States and sending money home, vastly more than happens through direct aid of the United States to those countries. And so what you are doing is by those people earning their money, sending it to those countries, it is also helping to lift those countries up. And as those countries become more economically stable, you have a lesser demand for people wanting to immigrate from those countries because it becomes a more viable place to flourish and to live. And so we would be helping ourselves, and we would also be helping those places that we continually see these caravans coming from, of people trying to find a better life, if we made their lives better as well. So,
it is interesting you say that, because I think one of the myths that we Americans make is everybody wants to come to America.
Yeah.
And that's really not true. I mean, there are people who are more than willing to stay home. They're more than willing to stay in Guatemala, where their family is, where their heritage is, where their history is. But they leave because their current context is intolerable, and they want a better life for their kids. And so they think of the United States and say, that's where we need to go. Right.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting. So let's talk a little bit about Michael, because I want to do a little bit on the other side. I think we have both agree that we need generous immigration, and we need to. Well, let's talk. We're going to talk a little bit about the way immigrants are treated, or people waiting for their processing. But I need to say, before we get the emails, okay, neither one of us supports open borders, correct?
Right. Correct.
Okay, so we're good on that. So,
exactly.
I mean, nations do have a sovereign right. I'll make that argument. I don't like rights arguments, but I'm going to say that.
Right.
They have a sovereign right to protect their borders, to secure their borders. And why would that be?
Yeah. You say, why would that be?
Why would that be? Why would any nation have a right and want to take care of their borders, secure their borders?
Well, I mean, human beings all live in varying degrees of communities. And to some degree, you have to have some ability to shape and control the community that you're in, whether that be your family, whether it be your neighborhood and town, or whether it be your nation. So there has to be some sense of order, to how that works. I think this may not be a perfect parallel, but it to somewhat gets at it to me with the immigration issue. If you think back to Prohibition, when we tried to prohibit alcohol, we tried to wipe out any vestige of alcohol existing anywhere. And so you ended up spending tremendous amount of law enforcement resources trying to make sure that nobody was consuming alcohol. And in the meantime, you gave the incentive for nefarious activities to develop, to produce that alcohol and to distribute it, which then also those people that got into that business then expanded into other areas that ended up corrupting society and breaking laws and so on, rather than simply allowing alcohol to exist and regulating it and controlling what happens with it, which is what we've had since Prohibition, that we tried to regulate that. There's a similar sense that happens with immigration by trying to say, we're not going to allow anybody to come across this border. There's no worker visas. There's no, you try to create this rigid wall, and then you hire hundreds and thousands of enforcement people trying to keep anybody from coming across the border. If you were to relax some of the, when I would say migration issues, for instance, worker visas where people could come across, those people would then come through the normal border channels. They come through El Paso, they come through Juarez, they come through places like that. You would have them. And so you would have far, far fewer people trying to circumvent the process to come across the border illegally. And then your resources could be devoted to really going after those people who are trying to do nefarious stuff. nefarious things and be able to focus on them. So there needs to be some control of the border, but I think the question is, how do we view what is the role of interaction between people that are not Americans, people that are Americans? I think you could easily have 100 million people, come to the United States in a relatively short number of years if we just throw the borders wide open, and that would create, I think, tremendous disruption, obviously, to society, overwhelm systems, so I think I don't think there's anything unjust or unbiblical about the idea that communities should be able to set their boundaries in terms of maintaining a just and orderly world for their citizens.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's right. But it does get to be presented in a way that if you are for border security, then you are for limiting immigration. If you are against it, you're for open borders kind of stuff.
Right.
And here's the thing again, and this is you and I both know this is not the only subject.
Right.
Everything is, and I blame the politicians for this. Everything's either or. Everything is either or. I believe in a generous immigration quota, and I can make the case why I think that is.
Right.
That should be. I'm not saying throw open the borders and let people rush in.
Right. Exactly.
But we can't have that discussion, because the minute I say I'm for generous immigration quotas, all of a sudden I'm open borders, right?
Yeah, right.
By the way, and I'm also a socialist. I don't know how that works, but throw that into, because that's what we do.
Yeah.
And once again, and I don't know if it's just because we just have to have our worldviews neat and clean, but the complexity of these things and the nuance just gets overlooked.
Yeah. Well, it's in a polarized world, it's the continual strategy of picking out the worst example of your opponent and saying that paints everybody who has that view, while being completely generous with people on your side of the view that only have the best, assigning them only the best intentions.
Yeah. The one thing on this whole immigration thing that I have strongly, as a Christian, I have strongly objected to, and was, in the previous administration, characterizing, I can never pronounce that word. Mexicans as rapists and murderers.
Yeah, exactly.
Vermin, animals.
Yes.
And as a Christian, I mean, this diminishes the image of God in good people who are human.
Right.
I don't debate the fact that there may be people coming across the border that want to sell drugs. I'm just simply saying is that the problem is that, and we call it racist dog whistles, and it is.
Right.
But biblically, it is just incorrect. That these people are made in the image of God, just as I am. Jesus has died for these people.
Right.
And to begin the conversation by just dismissing these people as somehow down on the evolutionary chain is completely unacceptable from a biblical perspective.
But the primary reason, and this has been documented so many times over and over again, I should say I don't consider myself to be a foremost expert on this topic. I've read about it, and it's something that I continue to follow.
Oh, you're just too humble, Michael. That's the problem.
Because I'm sure anybody who really knows all the numbers and details about immigration is going to listen to the stuff that I'm saying. It's, but you missed this, you didn't do that, you got nuances. Yeah, and I understand that. But I really think that the one thing that is clear that everybody I know of that studies this agree on is the number one reason that people come into the United States as illegal immigrants is because of economic opportunity. Right. That's the thing that they're doing. They're wanting to advance themselves economically. The second big driver for people coming here is to reunite families. And ironically, going back to my other issue about my prohibition example of trying to create such a rigid border enforcement scheme or immigration scheme, it used to be until about 10 or 15 years ago that you would have people illegally come across the border. They work in the fields for a few weeks, or they do some construction for a summer or something like that. And then they would go home. Yeah. And so then they'd be gone for 6 months, 9 months or whatever. And then maybe they'll return the next year to come do some work again. Well, because you make the border so rigid and make it such a deal to get across the border, what ended up happening is that people would come here to work. And the idea of trying to go back across the border and come back again became so difficult that people actually stayed in the United States longer than they would have otherwise, because you can't go back and forth across the border. So if you had a legal process whereby people could come into the border, work for that period of time, and then go back home, you would have less immigrants here over an extended period of time, because those people would be able to travel home. So, but my basic point I was going to get to there was, the number one issue is economic. The second issue is family. And right now, I think some of the things that we've been seeing in recent years has been the societal corruption that has happened in much of Central America, south of Mexico, exacerbated by a number of natural disasters, hurricanes and that type of thing, that have damaged the economies of those places. And so those people are coming out of desperation, trying to find a better life, trying to escape violence from corrupt governments, trying to just survive and make a living. So you talk about Jesus in Matthew 25, I was hungry and I was naked. And, what did you, I mean, if that is not an example of, on a sort of a societal scale in terms of the ethics that we have, and that doesn't mean that we should be taking in everybody that claims asylum. It doesn't mean that everybody that comes north, that we have an obligation to take everyone in. But to refer to the vast majority of these people as vermin and rapists and criminals and that type of thing is just totally demeaning. And the other one, you get me on a roll here, but the other one that I heard recently was when we were having the spike in the coronavirus, which was happening in places like Tennessee and Virginia and so. Oh, it's because we're letting those immigrants in. Those immigrants they're bringing. And so this idea of always scapegoating people that are immigrants for everything.
Let's forget the fact that you wouldn't take the vaccine and you won't wear a mask and all this stuff, but we'll blame the immigrants for this. That particular. Yeah. So let's go there, and I'm going to go there, folks. Let's talk race in this. The reality is the focus on illegal immigration is not on the illegals who are here who are white. Yeah. I recently read that a lot of Canadians are here illegally because they have overstayed their visas, right? Mm-hmm. You don't hear about that. Mm-hmm. What you hear about are everybody from Latin America. And again, send me the emails about playing the race card. That's fine with me. But the reality is, and listen, let's be honest, Donald Trump, remember Donald Trump, who basically he met with somebody from Sweden or one of the Nordic countries, I don't remember, and said, well, why can't we get more immigrants like them? Right? Yeah. While the other countries were S-hole countries. Right. Yeah. So again, let's just point it out. And I know some of you will turn the video off right here, but that's all right. Let's just point it out that some of this is based on at least unconscious racial caricatures. Right. Well, I think if you look from an economic standpoint, and I've read like the Cato Institute, Libertarian Group. I've read Brookings Institute, it's a more left-centered group. Most of these groups all come to pretty common consensus that from an economic standpoint, there really isn't a good argument against allowing, like you said, more generous immigration. More generous immigration both helps America and helps the immigrants that are coming here in their home countries. So we can talk endlessly about all the various economic issues. I think one of the things that happens is that when immigrants do come, they can tend to concentrate in particular geographic areas. Right. And I think that creates a challenge in that it begins to change the makeup and the culture
of that location, and the people who are there in those locations feel threatened, and they feel like, you know, their way of life is being threatened by immigrants coming here, and that is a legitimate kind of sense of angst that you know, your life is going to change. But I'm sorry, for somebody who's in rural Montana or small town South Dakota, or, you know, just other rural communities who've likely never seen somebody who is an immigrant, latching on to that's what's destroying America is, you know, immigrants coming to the United States. I think the bigger challenge, and I tend to agree with you, I think the bigger issue is people's anxiety and angst about their way of life, their culture changing. There are some legitimate aspects to that, in that it is going to change. I mean, it is going to be different. And there is a grieving that happens, I think, sometimes with a life changing from the way that you knew it. But we can't escape the fact that in American culture, race is always thoroughly integrated with that whole issue of things changing, because people are coming in that look different from us, that have different language, that have different food tastes, that, you know, all that kind of thing. So, yeah.
So if I might for a minute, just move a little bit into a different direction that includes immigration. Immigrants are not taking our jobs. I think we've talked about that. Let's talk about automation. Because I mean, where we live, I walk into Walmart and I try real hard not to shop at Walmart for various reasons, but I also live in a context that's very homogeneous ethnically. And so this boy who is a foodie and who loves food from all cultures, I struggle to find it. And frankly, to be honest, Walmart is the one place where you can get more of this stuff.
There you go. Okay.
But I go in there and I see all this self-checkout and going on. And I just read a story a couple of weeks ago where I want to say it's McDonald's has been experimenting with robots making like your burger and everything.
Yeah, right.
The problem really isn't other people taking our jobs, is it?
No, I don't think so. The issue with automation too is the automation tends to automate those things that are the most routine and repetitive, which is often the lowest paying and the least rewarding jobs to do.
Right.
Is typically what it replaces. And by replacing those, new jobs eventually end up being created. You have, I think on the net, talked with a number of economists over the years. I think the consensus that I seem to hear from all of them is the idea that this tends to balance out over time. It's creative destruction. We used to have theater ushers who'd walk you to your seat. Well, we don't seem to, think that that's terrible. We don't have theater ushers. You used to have, the only way you could get your money or transact with the bank is you had to deal with a bank teller. You got ATMs. You talk about having gas attendants that worked at the gas stations who came out and filled your car. I guess if you're in New Jersey, you still have to have that, or whatever. I think that's Oregon also, I think, does that. But anyway, we've had a variety of industries that have disappeared over time, but new industries emerge. And I think the bigger challenge, the fly in the ointment in some of that, is that creative destruction sometimes destroys certain types of jobs or industries that may be concentrated in particular locales. Okay. And the new work that is created sometimes is created in other places. And that requires uprooting from your community in one place to go to another community in another place in order to pursue those new opportunities, which often means leaving social networks and family and support in order to do that, which is a difficult thing and a scary thing for people to do. So it's not as smooth and frictionless, I think, as a lot of economists would like to paint the picture. But I think it is true that on balance, that is what happens. Old jobs get destroyed, new jobs get created.
Okay. Wow.
So,
that's interesting. So let's talk briefly, if we can, about the Dreamers. I have to tell you, I have a special place for the Dreamers in my heart.
Yeah.
The dreamers are those whose parents brought them here. Their parents are not here legally, but they were born here. Some of them might have been brought here as little children, but they were either that or born here. I'm thinking maybe I've got that wrong, but anyway, they're here, not of their own volition, but they're here. The United States is their country.
Right.
You know, they may have come from Mexico or Honduras, but they have grown up here. The U.S. is their country. They're American. They identify as American. Why can't we give them this status, whether it's citizenship status or let them be legal here permanently? I mean, what is the issue here? These are people that if you send them, these are young people, if you send them back to their quote unquote home country, they're going to be in a foreign land. And why do we got politicians who oppose this? To me, this is one of those things where I want to say, really, you know, do we really have to lay the obviousness of this out for you?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think part of what some would argue is that if you don't send these people back, then you're just giving license for more people to come do this. Right. So you got to take this hard line to you know, there are ways around that. There are ways around it. You create paths. You
create paths. It's what I, you know, from my perspective, it's the legalist argument. This is what the law says, and we got to follow the law. Well, Jesus had some stuff to say about that, right?
Right.
And so did Paul. And, you know, and again, the people who seem to be most adamant about it are Christians. It's like, have you read the New Testament?
Right.
So, you know, again, it's not an issue of approving of illegal immigration. It's an issue of what do we do with these folks who are now on the ground, and how do we deal with this? I mean, I just can't believe I struggle with this because I know there are some issues of immigration that are complicated, and I get that. And reasonable people can reasonably disagree. I don't understand why there's an issue on this.
Yeah, it does in terms of a justice, just purely human compassion, having empathy for other people. It to me is just such an obvious thing that something has to be done here to you know, not grandfather this in, but to create a path for these issues to be resolved. And that speaks to another issue. Like you said, several of these things are all interconnected and interrelated. And so there does need to be a comprehensive package that would deal with these. But as we've said on so many of these other topics, when it comes to politicians, the resolution of the issue is not the thing that benefits the politician the most. It's the continued argument, debate, bludgeoning your opponent for being open borders or being, you know, cruel to people of color, you know, whichever thing you want to use in order to beat on your opponent with. It's much more effective, much more useful as a political football than any resolution would be. I think there are things that we could do that would get us. There was the proposal of 2014. There was a comprehensive immigration bill that passed the House, but they couldn't get it through the Senate. From what I understand of that bill, I think something like that would have gotten to 75, 80% of the way to, you know, resolving or at least bringing under control a number of these issues. But that's not valuable to politicians to have the issue resolved.
Well, and that's true with lots of issues, right?
Right.
I mean, I have to tell you, I think, you know, when they always do the ranking of people we trust less, I think we need to elevate used car salesmen up from the bottom and put politicians down there. It's just infuriating to me because for me, right, one of the things about democracy is conversation. Right. And having this conversation among people who disagree, and then say, how can we do this and come to a reasonable conclusion where all of us get something of what we want, but we don't get everything of what we want.
Right.
And we just can't do that. And I just got to tell you, it's just so frustrating to me. And I need to tell, I mean, I just need to say, I always, when people say to me, I had actually someone asked me last week, what can I do to be informed but not go insane? And the answer is, number one, do not watch any of the cable news shows in the evening.
Yes.
Anything after 6 o'clock, do not. Well, I don't care if it's Fox or CNN or MSNBC. Do not watch them, because their job is not to give you the truth. Their job is to gin up their base so that they can continue to get their ratings. And if you continue to get your information from them, no offense, but you're a fool. All right, I'm done preaching.
Amen. Preach.
Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous what these clowns do. I mean, anyway.
Right.
So, Michael, I want to start to bring this back around.
Yeah.
You're a Christian, and you try to pattern your life after your understanding of your faith. If an immigrant comes to your area, we're not going to talk legal or illegal. If somebody comes to your area, your next door neighbor is someone from another country. As a Christian, how are you going to treat him or her or them?
I'm going to welcome them like I would any neighbor. Somebody moves into the house next door, we're going to bake an apple pie and walk over to the door and hand it to them and introduce ourselves, and hopefully get into some conversation about where their family, the kids, if they've got kids, who their kids are and what they do, and maybe some of their interests. And if there's our neighborhood where we live, we often have neighborhood-wide events where we'll have parties down in a park that's adjacent to our neighborhood, or they have a 4th of July parade for the little kids, where the kids dress up as various characters and parade down one of the main streets in our neighborhood and do things like that. So I'll be telling them about, hey, you got to make sure you come to, the neighborhood thing coming up next time. And then just doing as I would any of my other immediate neighbors of as I see them working in the yard and trying to fix things or address things, and they seem to be struggling with something. Hey, I've got a tool over here, in my shed that might help you with that. It's just that sense of making them feel included and welcoming them. And I think in our culture also, depending on who the neighbor is and what their background is, what ethnic group there is to also be aware on their behalf for their safety from people that may not be as welcoming toward them as well. So,
I think that's great. And by the way, I'd be glad to be your neighbor any day. I have to tell you, but also, don't you want to learn from them? I mean, don't you want to learn their culture and their context? And by the way, invite me over for dinner and give me some of your food, because I'm a foodie and I'm ready to try whatever, right?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there's a richness, isn't there? I don't know how far you have traveled. I have traveled to several different countries. I just find such a richness in other cultures. And I don't just mean the food, which is part of it, but I just mean customs. And I just, when I go to other cultures, I just try to bathe myself in it, because there's a richness to it. And that's not to say their culture's better than mine or worse. It's just to say, oh my gosh, there's this wonderful diversity and meaning here, and I just want to be a part of it.
Yeah. Well, all my neighbors live on either side of me. The neighbors behind me are all Mexican American. None of them are immigrants. These are all people that have been in this. Their families have been in the States 3, 4, 5 generations. So they're not immigrants. But still, I've been here for 30 years, and I still keep coming across stuff that's fun. The other day, I was working on my my back deck, and I was trying to do some repairs and things like that. And all of a sudden I hear this not real loud, but mariachi kind of style music playing. And I'm trying to figure out, what is going on? So I'm kind of peeking over between the slats of the fence in the neighbor's yard behind me. And there are 2 teenage couples, boy and girl, 2 couples, and they are walking a dance, to this mariachi music. And then there was a young adult out there that would stop the music every now and then. He said, okay, now, you do this, that, and the steps. They were learning this dance. So then that got me curious. I was asking a neighbor there, so what's going on back there? Oh, yeah. There's this big fiesta coming up on such and such a deal. And there's dance coming up. So they're all learning these steps in order to perform this dance at this fiesta that they're going to. And so I learned all about this fiesta and where it came from. And, it's just so much fun to learn about what is such a normal part of other people's lives that to me was something I never experienced.
Yeah, it's just cool. I'm with you,
Yeah.
man. I'm with you. It's really good. Yeah, and in fact, actually, when I came out there a few years ago, you and I got together. I found the culture of Kansas City barbecue to be a wonderful experience too.
Yeah, indeed.
So,
yeah. Indeed, indeed.
All right. So let me ask you this. This is going to be the last question for the day, and then we're done. Michael, if you got a call from the Biden White House and said, Michael, give us some advice on what we need to do about immigration, what would be just one or two things you would mention?
I think some of the things I've already mentioned, and part of that is to create a controlled but more generous flow of people back and forth across the border for the various work issues in terms of temporary workers, that type of thing. That would take, I think, some of the need for rigorous border enforcement away, because if people could come on a legal basis to do the things that they want to do, and we were controlling that, you would have to spend far less time policing that and being able to police the things that are truly a problem. I think the other thing that I would suggest that we do, and I don't know what specific, what specific actions need to be taken, but I would put this focus that we need to be looking at how we create stronger national neighbors to our south in terms of having more just and equitable governments, and in aiding with climate change disasters of hurricanes and that type of thing, so that people to the south of us have more stable societies, that we don't have this continuous pressure of people wanting, to come to the United States in order just to survive. And by having, I think, those two things together, you create more stability at home, more equity at home, and then you allow people to work in the United States on a legal basis where they can send money home. I think eventually you begin to have a stabilizing place across the region where we aren't constantly dealing with these struggles. So those are a couple of things on a more sort of long-term scale. There's a number of short-term issues. Those are just a couple of things I think of.
I appreciate that. And so one of the things I've heard in what you've said on a couple, 3 times here, what I've drawn from that is what you're saying. Sometimes our policies toward Latin America are part of the problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Honduras had a coup about 12 years ago, and we basically just stood by and said, well, isn't that too bad? And then just went along with, and so now you have gangs and violent gangs and threatening people, and it's created a miserable life for people. And instead of really standing up for what had been a democratic government and trying to protect that.
Yeah. And
so part of the reason that some of these people coming here are direct and indirect results of American policy that we've taken in those areas. So we are partly responsible for the reason that
we create our own problem and then we blame everyone else. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I know. All right. Well, we got to stop there. Michael, thank you. This has been a great conversation. By the way, next month in December, we will be discussing abundance versus scarcity, which I know, and the one thing, Michael, that I've appreciated over the years in reading your stuff is that this has been a big issue for you.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about this, particularly in the Christmas season when we have supply lines and problems with that. Abundance versus scarcity. Are things as scarce as we say they are? Yeah. And I'm looking forward to that conversation next month. So that'll be next month in December, friends. Yeah. So I hope you'll join us for that conversation. So I'm going to leave you. We're going to leave you. I'm Alan Bevere, and this is Faith Seeking Understanding University, whose patron saint is Anselm of Canterbury, who said, "I do not believe so that I understand, but I do not understand so that I may believe, but I believe and that so that I may understand." Folks, keep seeking. It's great to have had this conversation. And as always, Michael, gosh, I just appreciate the conversations you and I have very much.
I do too. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of it.
It's a lot of fun. So anyway, all right, friends, take care.
right. Bye-bye.